Hey lore lovers, my name's Eric with the Lorebrarians YouTube channel, and welcome to part 2 of the Plane of Zendikar Explained. Today we'll take a step back in time to the first stirrings of life and civilization on Zendikar, then trace its growth, destruction, struggles and triumphs through the thousands of years to the present day. We'll concern ourselves both with the history of the plane as well as the stories and character arcs of the individuals that have visited or populate its continents. If you haven't already, be sure to check out part 1 of our Plane of Zendikar Explained, which I'll link in the description. And if you're a fan of lore and storytelling, or if Magic the Gathering is dear to you, consider subscribing to the channel where lore videos are uploaded weekly. The support is much appreciated. I want this video to act as a cursory guide through the thousands of years of history on Zendikar. There are stories much more intricate and complex than we have time for that will no doubt have their chance in the spotlight in the months to come. Alright, we'll begin our journey before the dawn of recorded history on Zendikar. Let's dive in. The Plane of Zendikar is harsh and unforgiving, a world whose primeval mana flows unrelenting across the landscape, shaping the continents in its wake. But it was not always so. There was a time where the violent upheavals of the Royal were not yet felt, where the rich reserves of mana unfurled in beautiful growth rather than chaotic destruction. This is the Zendikar of the ancient past. Like many planes in the multiverse, it's difficult to divine much detail about Zendikar's beginnings, and will have to rely on inference and speculation. Still, much of the plane's prehistory is dominated by an extensive period of irrepressible growth and natural development, fueled by the deep wellspring of raw energies that make Zendikar quite unique. The land was dangerous, no doubt, but it wasn't actively trying to harm its inhabitants. Rather, lush primordial forests nurtured the growth of exotic plant and animal species, where early predators stalked the shadows, and sweeping vistas of rolling plains fostered communities of grazing beasts. It is possible that the first primitive sentient creatures walked the shores and jungles of ancient Zendikar. This is perhaps when the Surikar, a reptilian humanoid species, first appeared and reached the peak of their power. They are known to the future Zendikari as a backwards and undeveloped race that remains stunted in growth. But in prehistoric times, the Surikar, with their strong frames and primitive sense of language and community, likely dominated the ancient landscape. And so Zendikar remained a plane of incubation and growth. Soon, forerunners of civilization appeared in the form of tribal humans, elves, merfolk, and Kor. It's impossible to tell which of these creatures first spread across the continents, as many of them coexisted and cast off to all the continents of Zendikar in roughly the same time period. What we do know for sure is that one of these ancient races would soon come to dominate the others and shape much of Zendikar's early history, consolidating power on the continent of Ondu, then extending out in settlement and conquest until all of the plane was under its influence. The core empire of Makindi. It's uncertain what date the Makindi Empire first emerged, but its humble beginnings come in the eponymous city carved out of the Ondu rocks. The city of Makindi quickly became a hub of commerce and technology, fueled by the power of its stone forgers, mages that used lithomancy to shape stone and rock into exquisite works. The core of the Makindi expanded across Ondu as other races were developing their own civilizations across other continents. The humans on Akoum, the elves on Balaged, the merfolk on Sajiri. Decades later, the Makindi Empire extended beyond Ondu to neighboring continents, using its knowledge of lithomancy to assimilate, vassalize, or otherwise crush the other civilizations with a stone-forged fist. Their conquest of all of Zendikar was made possible by the creation of skyclaves, massive floating structures that could house thousands of core warriors, magistrates, and settlers at any given time, and that were equipped with a wide array of the most technologically advanced weapons ancient world had seen. Core magic and martial prowess destroyed the merfolk civilization of Benthedrix on Sajiri, sent the human tribes of Akoum scampering up the mountains to seek refuge, and brought the proud elvish nations of the Jaraga and Muldaya to heal in Balaged. High in the clouds above all 7 continents of Zendikar, the skyclaves kept ever-watching vigil across the greatest empire that Zendikar has ever known. For centuries, civilization and learning progressed at breakneck pace within the Makindi Empire, but the speed in which the empire gathered power and the corruption that developed within its ruling class would quickly be the great empire's undoing. In roughly -1500 AR, the Makindi Empire began its slow decay. One by one, the oppressed people of the continents rose up against their overlords, and one by one, the impregnable skyclaves came plummeting to the earth. It is at this time that the first stirrings of the Royal, Zendikar's violent and erratic storms of upheaval, were felt across the land, potentially spurred by the ancient core's unnatural magic. The skyclaves over Balaged and Akoum were taken by force. The Moldaya partisan Obun led the elvish nations to victory against the Balaged skyclave, and the human tribes that were forced into the mountains by the core centuries ago attacked the skyclave of Akoum. These Kargan tribes, as they became known, had the power of Akoum's dragons on their side, and they brought a fiery defeat to the core skyclave. Over to Zim, the Archangel Iona single-handedly destroyed a skyclave, where it would remain suspended for millennia, becoming the sky ruin of Emeria. The crushing blow to the Empire came when civil war gripped the continent of Ondu, and the Ondu skyclave turned against the capital of Makindi. Their massively destructive battle reduced the once great city to a gorge of dust, known as the Makindi Trenches, and the crippled skyclave plummeted to the Isle of War to become the Wari Ruins. In the midst of the chaos surrounding the Empire's collapse, the young core lithomancer and stoneforger Nahiri ascended to Planeswalker status and traveled the multiverse with her tutor, the vampire Soren Markov. In the year -1440 AR, the pair discovered the interplanar beings of consumption and destruction known as the Eldrazi. They witnessed the complete annihilation of an unknown plane and worried for the safety of the multiverse. In their travels, the two came across the Elder Dragon Planeswalker Ugin, who had been studying the nature of the Eldrazi for many years. The three Planeswalkers hatched a plan to either defeat or imprison the Eldrazi Titans, but they needed a plane with rich reserves of mana to act as bait and lure them into physical form. Against Nahiri's objection, they decided her home plane of Zendikar was the perfect place to spring their trap. The three returned to Zendikar and began constructing a prison for the Eldrazi, which would soon be named the Aligned Hedron Network. For nearly 4 decades, as the Makindi Empire was receding, Nahiri and Ugin busied themselves with constructing the stone hedrons that would form the foundation of the prison. Nahiri shaped them and Ugin inscribed them with the draconic ruins. Then the pair connected them to the ley lines of the plane in order to channel its magic. Now in its death throes, the last Makindi skyclave was obliterated above Sejiri in a moment that would have everlasting repercussions for the future of the plane. The coming of the Eldrazi. Beings of the blind eternities with the power to distort reality, consume entire planes, and traverse the multiverse in corporeal form, the three Eldrazi Titans descended on Zendikar like a pack of ravenous wolves, drawn to the plane by its rich reserves of mana and Soren Markov's guidance. The ancient races of Zendikar could only watch in gaping horror as the incomprehensible Titans manifested into physical form and sent forth waves of their brood to begin the plane-wide consumption. With a careless flick of a massive Eldrazi tentacle, the last skyclave of the once great Makindi Empire fell sundered into the Sejiri glaciers. The denizens of Zendikar, having earned their hard-fought freedom, were battered, dispersed, and ill-equipped to take on any threat, let alone one as significant as the Eldrazi. They mounted what resistance they could, but combating an interplanar threat required interplanar beings. Ugin, Soren, and Nahiri, with the power of pre-mending planeswalkers and with their traps set, stood in the face of the Eldrazi magic. Ugin combated the hordes with his own understanding of colorless mana, burning them with ghost fire. Soren used his powers over life and death to drain the essence out of the Titans and their broods, stalling their movements. And Nahiri used her lithomancy to activate the Hedron network, turning the entire plane of Zendikar into a prison that locked the Titans in physical form and brought them into a state of dormancy. The seal of the spell was created at a site deep within the Akoum mountain range, known as the Eye of Ugin, and bound so that only the presence of 3 Planeswalker sparks and Ugin's ghost fire could undo the spell. With their work complete, Ugin and Soren returned to their travels in the multiverse, but Nahiri remained acting as a guardian of her plane and protector of the Eye. With the ancient Makindi Empire defeated and the plane devastated by the power of the Eldrazi, Zendikar entered a dark age in which the races forgot their past and resorted to tribalism and ritualism. For centuries, Nahiri maintained vigil over her Hedron network, ensuring that the Eldrazi abominations would never again rise to consume her homeland. She taught her core kin about the Hedron network and took them to particularly strong sites of mana ley lines to complete spells that maintained the Hedron alignment. She was ambiguous with her instruction and told them the rituals were used to appease 3 old and terrible gods. In order to keep the Hedrons out of meddling hands, Nahiri confronted visiting planeswalkers and told them to leave in peace. Around this time, the demon planeswalker Obnixilis came to Zendikar hoping to use its powerful mana to cure him of the Chainveil's curse. But he could not control the chaos of Zendikar, and his planeswalker spark was ripped from him. Nahiri, sensing his dark motives, placed a Hedron in his forehead, further weakening him and trapping him on the plane. At this time, the Royal also began to fully take shape, a reaction to the Eldrazi infection deep within the Plane of Zendikar. Its violent storms and upheaval tore across the plane and kept it mainly uncivilized. The years took a toll on the weary Lithomancer, and eventually Nahiri retreated completely into the Eye of Ugin within the Akoum mountain range, covering herself within a stone cocoon and meditating for thousands of years. With Nahiri gone, the denizens of Zendikar were left to fend for themselves and to wonder the purpose of the mysterious Hedrons floating across its skies. The traditional travels of the core to maintain the Hedron alignment became obscured. They no longer believed they were keeping angry gods imprisoned, but were rather benevolent gods with Nahiri as their messenger. All memory of the Makindi disappeared, as their ruins were covered by earth or sea or destroyed by the Royal. In Akoum, a tribe of humans worshipped the Forgotten Gods at the base of the Teeth of Akoum mountain range, which had grown to swallow the imprisoned Eldrazi titans. These tribes became cultists that performed blood rituals and sacrifices to their gods. This would soon have dire consequences for the plane, as the magic of the rituals disrupted the seal on the Eldrazi prison, and the titans rested from their loosened shackles. In roughly 3400 AR, 4,000 years after their imprisonment, the Eldrazi could once again taste freedom. Although the magic of the Hedron network kept the titans imprisoned, the ritualists loosened the bonds enough to allow the 3 to consume enough mana to send forth their brood lineages. In the shockwave of energy and Eldrazi drones that emerged from the prison, the tribal cultists were destroyed. Only 12 remained, but they were corrupted and transformed into the first vampires of Zendikar, becoming the 12 original Blood Chiefs. Their will was crushed, and they became enthralled by the Eldrazi. Soon the brood lineages and their vampire slaves once more rolled across Zendikar, consuming the plane's mana and killing its creatures. With Nahiri's attention turned inward, the races of Zendikar were left to fend for themselves. Thousands perished as armies of merfolk, humans, core, goblins, and minotaur assembled on the ground, and hosts of angels and sphinxes gathered in the skies. They threw the combined military might of Zendikar at the broods to no avail. Although the Eldrazi were not powerful enough to dominate the angels like they had the vampires, they cursed them, pulling the halos over the angels' eyes and preventing them from aiding the downtrodden. Comrades in arms were slain, consumed, or consigned to oblivion. Eventually, Nahiri emerged from her isolation and feared for the worst. It seemed the Eye was not holding, and her 2 allies failed to answer her calls. She used her godlike powers to destroy much of the Eldrazi brood and reinforce the seal of the prison before planeswalking away in search of Ugin and Sorin. This period of heroic valor and sacrifice in the face of desolation is preserved in inscriptions on tombs in the Crypt of Agadeem, no doubt constructed shortly after to commemorate the fallen. With the Eldrazi secured in stasis once more, and with the planar protector gone, the Zendikari were left to pick up the pieces. It is from this memory of the Eldrazi, distorted and half-remembered through the years, that the religions of Zendikar came to be. Worshipping 3 benevolent gods named Ula, Kosi, and Emiria, the scars of the past were twisted and forgotten. In the following centuries, the final shaping of Zendikar into what it is takes place. The elves form 3 large and loosely affiliated nations. The humans thrive on Tazim and Akoum. The core become ever more nomadic in nature. The merfolk form conclaves of learning across many continents, and the vampires retreat into the swamps of Goldraz, swelling their ranks and forgetting their true origins. And in the backdrop of it all, the Royal remains, scattering peoples and villages in an imprecise attempt to rid itself of a long-forgotten infection. We now approach the 4550s AR, where the happenings of the original Zendikar block transpire. The continents have taken on familiar appearances. Walled cities of Malakir and Seagate have been erected as bastions of civilization in an otherwise untamed world. Adventuring parties seek out the treasures and ancient ruins of an age long past, and the memory of the Eldrazi exists only in the twisted image of old benevolent gods. An equilibrium has remained for centuries, but it's about to be undone. Spurred on by the hidden machinations of the Elder Dragon Planeswalker Nicol Bolas, the Pyromancer Chandra Nalaar, the Mind Mage Jace Beleren, and the Dragon Speaker Sarkhan Vol race toward the Eye of Ugin. Chandra seeks the aid of the vampiric ruin expert Anawan to uncover the location of the Eye, and has in her custody a glass vial of Ghostfire, born from the spirit dragon Ugin. When Nalaar finally discovers the Eye of Ugin deep within the Akoum mountain range, she's confronted by Jace and Sarkhan. 3 Planeswalker sparks present themselves in the antechamber, along with the Ghostfire, the ingredients necessary to break the seal of the Eye and awaken the slumbering titans. Once more the Eldrazi broods, which have not been seen for over 1,000 years, pour out of Akoum, ravaging the landscape and the inhabitants of Zendikar, gathering mana to fuel the titans' power. Although the prison strains, the bars yet hold Ulamog, Kozilek, and Emrakul, it isn't until the following year that they finally break free. Sorin Markov returns to Zendikar to find it embattled with the vile Eldrazi broods, with no sign of his 2 compatriots of old. He does, however, find another planeswalker in Nissa Ravain, a Jaraga elf of Balaged that tries desperately to save her people and her lands from the Eldrazi hordes. Sorin tells Nissa of Zendikar's ancient past and of the true nature of the Eldrazi, and urges her to take him to the Eye so that they may reinforce the magical seal. The two venture into the Teeth of Akoum, but Nissa has a change of heart upon entering the chamber. She wants nothing more than to save and heal the plane she is so deeply connected to, and believes that if the Titans were to be released, they would leave Zendikar and once more travel the blind eternities. Nissa takes her staff and breaks the central hedron, shattering the prison and unleashing the Eldrazi Titans for the first time in nearly 6,000 years. Although Nissa's plight was honorable, her gross short-sightedness and limited understanding of the Eldrazi would have terrible repercussions for the world she tries so desperately to save. The Titans, unfettered by their chains and hungry after their millennia imprisonment, begin consuming the plane at an unimaginable rate. Broodling drones and larger Eldrazi's eat, kill, and desecrate the landscape, drawing in mana and funneling it to the 3. The gods of old, benevolent and protective, are revealed to be nothing more than the twisted memories of these vile creatures, as the flavor text of Shrine of the Forsaken Gods entails. What we can glean from the release of the Titans and the decades leading up to it comes to us in the Invoker's Tales, a collection of works seen in the flavor text of many cards that paints the picture of a world betrayed by its false beliefs. A people that thought the royal was the enemy and that the gods were salvation, realizing that reality was quite the opposite. The planeswalker Gideon Jura has been helping the Zendikari fight off brood attacks at small camps and frontier sites across the plane, directing survivors towards what safety they can find. But when he sees the massive and incomprehensible figure of Emrakul loom over the horizon, his heart sinks. He realizes that he will not be enough, and so planeswalks away, seeking powerful allies in what will be known as the Battle for Zendikar. Creatures from all races and walks of life gather as allies, assembling great armies to thwart the plane's consumers. Great serpents and leviathans rise up from the deep, the archangel Iona and a heavenly host fly down to lead, and even the land itself presents elemental warriors to aid in the fight. Time and again they throw themselves at the Eldrazi, but time and again they are defeated. The city of Seagate, once a shining beacon of hope, is overrun and left in desolation. In Guldraz, the dark city of Malakir has fallen to civil war, as over half the vampire race, whose origin is deeply tied to the Eldrazi, are enthralled and subjugated by the Titans. Ulamog tears across Balaged and Sejiri, rendering them lifeless husks. Despite the valiant efforts and sacrifice of the Zendikari, all seems lost in the battle for the plane. Until the arrival of Gideon, who has brought with him a contingent of planeswalkers including Jace, Chandra, Nissa, Kiora, and Ugin. Together they advance on Ulamog's position and seek to retake Seagate. Jace combines his knowledge of the Hedrons through scrutiny and discussion with Ugin, with Nissa's connection to the mana ley lines of the plane, to create an aligned Hedron network around Seagate and bind the Titan Ulamog once more. But their plan is thwarted by the de-sparked Obnixilis, who knocks the Hedrons out of alignment and positions himself to absorb the full brunt of their burst of stored mana, reigniting him and granting him status of Planeswalker once more, after several hundred years of imprisonment. As Gideon and the Zendikari descend upon the disoriented Ulamog, Nixilis uses his refound power to coax the Titan Kozilek from its hiding place deep beneath the earth. The Zendikari are no match for two Titans, and the Planeswalkers are no match for the Ascended Demon, who dominates several Eldrazi drones and uses them to capture Jace, Gideon, and Nissa. As an act of cruelty and spite, he traps the trio in a reality-distorting prison, seen in the card Remorseless Punishment. Just before their final demise, the pyromancer Chandra Nalar arrives, slaying the Eldrazi spawn, defeating Ob Nixilis, and rescuing Jace, Gideon, and Nissa from their prison. A moment of reprieve is gone all too soon, as the Planeswalkers realize their job is yet unfinished. In a desperate gamble to save Zendikar from its fast-approaching destruction, the four hatch a plan to destroy the Eldrazi rather than imprison them. This gambit is illustrated in the cards Bonds of Mortality and Fall of the Titans, in which Jace and Nissa direct the ley lines of Zendikar to anchor the two Titans to reality, binding them into physical form that could be harmed, while Gideon holds the Eldrazi broods at bay and Chandra fuses her pyromancy with the ley lines, unleashing a devastating inferno of energy that surges through the bound Titans and renders them ash. With Ulamog and Kozilek seemingly killed and Emrakul nowhere to be seen, the Eldrazi broods quickly wither away. The battle for Zendikar is won by the Zendikari. Wastelands, fallen friends, and crumbling civilizations surround the survivors. The flavor text of near-death experience sums up the sentiment frankly. And yet, Zendikar is a plane of endless mana and burgeoning growth, and it begins rebuilding as quickly as it was destroyed. As for the Planeswalkers who were integral in defense of the plane, they agree that far more threats exist in the multiverse, and that they stand a better chance of defeating them together. And so the Gatewatch is formed, as each Planeswalker takes their oath. This brings us to the current time of the Zendikar Rising set, which sees a world on the mend as new life and growth suffuse the continents to heal that which the Eldrazi destroyed. The plane is still quite dangerous, filled with ancient sites and treasures, instilling a sense of adventure within the hearts of explorers. The sentiment is buoyed with the reactivation and emergence of the derelict skyclaves of the Makindi Empire. For 6,000 years, the skyclaves have laid dormant, buried under earth, ice, wave, and root, the only one visible being the floating sky ruin of Emeria. When the Archangel Iona left her position as the Guardian of Emeria during the Battle for Zendikar, the path was clear for Akiri, a fearless core lineslinger, and her party of adventurers to scale the Skyclave and uncover its secrets. Their trespass had unforeseen consequences of activating the Skyclave defenses, which ripped the remaining 6 from their tombs and opened up their wonders to the world of Zendikar. Now, expeditionary houses from the restored city of Seagate race to uncover the clues of the ancient past and harness the power of the Makindi core. Within this backdrop of growth and adventure, Nahiri, the heir of the ancient core, seeks to right the wrongs done to her plane and restore it to its former glory. To this end, she seeks to subdue the dangerous royal, a horrifying symptom of an alien infection that is preventing the plane from reaching its fullest potential. Nahiri approaches Nissa asking for companionship and a guiding light in order to find the lithoform core, ancient core artifacts that power the Skyclaves, and objects that Nahiri believes have the power to silence the royal. Nahiri's motives are anathema to Nissa's, who believes the royal is as much a natural part of Zendikar as anything else, and who firsthand learns of the destructive power of the lithoform cores when Nahiri uses one against an elemental and against the royal. This difference in philosophy pits the two self-styled guardians of Zendikar against one another as they vie for control over the lithoform core. Jace Beleren, at the behest of Nissa, gets caught in the crossfire of the feuding planeswalkers as he attempts to reach a truce between them in hopes of studying the lithoform artifacts. The confrontation takes place across the continents as Nahiri lithoforms the plane to her picture of a perfect Zendikar. Unbeknownst to her, each use of the artifact leaves behind a blight that corrupts the surrounding landscape. Nissa cannot bear to see her beloved plane in any more harm, and so she calls upon the soul of the plane and assembles a massive elemental army to wrest the lithoform core from Nahiri's possession. With it in her grasp, Nissa activates the core and uses it to send a burst of healing and restorative magic across all the continents of Zendikar. The lands of Balaget and Sajiri, completely consumed by the Eldrazi, are once more blooming with life. In the lands the Eldrazi touched, the wastes are slowly giving way to new growth as Zendikar heals old wounds and prepares itself for an unknown but extraordinarily bright future. Thanks for watching this video on the history of Zendikar. I hope you've enjoyed our journey through the ages of Zendikar's past as we learned of the powers that shaped the plane into what it is today. Leave a thumbs up if you liked the video, and don't forget to subscribe for weekly lore content. And now I want to hear from you. Let me know which period of Zendikar's past is your favorite, or what character's journeys is most intriguing in the comments below, as well as suggestions for future videos. I also want to give a shout out to a developing artist and member of the MTG community, Marin. Marco has expressed his love for lore and his interest in becoming an illustrator for Wizards of the Coast, so be sure to check out his art station and give him some love. I'll put a link in the description below, where you can also find the references used in this video. Until next time, go forth and explore the lore.